Good afternoon. Welcome to the weekly livestock market update. I'm Brownfield anchor reporter Megan Grebner with us as always to talk all things markets is University of Missouri Scott Brown. Good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon, Megan.
Happy Friday to you. It's a beautiful, sunny, still cool day here in Kentucky. I hope you're getting some nice spring and some warming weather in your area as well.
It's going to be a little rainy this weekend in Columbia, Missouri, but we've had a good few days up until then, although, as you say, it's cooler than normal.
All right, we're going to talk a little supply and demand. We're going to get into the consumer side of things, but to kick things off today, let's recap what happened this week in the markets.
Yeah, on the cattle side this week, live cattle were $1.35 higher this week. We look at those feeder cattle markets, they were anywhere from $3 to $5 higher this week. On the futures side, the June live cattle futures contract closed down a little more than $1 this week, while we saw the August feeder cattle futures contracts gain a lot of ground this week, up nearly $6.25 on the week. I think that had a lot to do with what was lower corn futures, as that July corn futures contract was down a little more than 86 cents this week. On the choice box beef price, we were $10.40 higher this week. We had strength across the board in all those components that make up the choice box beef price. On the hog side, barrel and gut prices on the cash side were a little more than $3 higher this week. The June lean hog futures contract was actually down 4 1/4 on the week, and the pork cutout value gained a little more than $2 this week.
We've had some viewers submit questions the last couple of weeks talking about and with concerns about the disconnect between live cattle prices and what's going on the box beef price. We haven't had that discussion for a little while, so I think maybe we should spend a little time focusing on it today. What are some things that we need to keep in mind and that we're continuing to watch in that discussion?
Yeah, so there's certainly some questions about price discovery that come up whenever we see the margins from farm to wholesale that have been growing like they have of late. Calls into question whether or not we have market participants that at times maybe have unfair advantage. And I'll just say, as we look at the data that's available to us, one of the things that I'll point out that I think has made margins be wider has a lot to do with just the supplies of fed cattle that we have on the marketplace today. We look at slaughter numbers. I talk about these every week, and I'm sure we will here in a minute. But just to come back to year to date, cattle slaughter, it's 5.7% higher than it was a year ago. Now, that's a little misleading because of COVID-19 during 2020. We've had pretty good runs of cattle slaughter each week, and I think that's put packers in a position where they haven't had to bid as aggressively for cattle as they otherwise would. Yet on the other side, demand is strong. And so demand for beef is strong. And so I think that's led to higher box beef prices. The last piece here that I'll say that I think is important to this discussion is just the added costs that come with COVID-19, whether that's social distancing or increased transportation costs. All those things I think have continued to leave a wedge between farm level prices and prices higher on the marketing chain, especially on the beef side of the equation. So I think that has a lot to do with it. So there's no simple answer of one side or the other is somehow at fault for this. And I say one side or the other, it's usually cattlemen versus packers has been the discussion. And I go, to me, it's a much more complicated story than just one's out to hurt the other.
I think we're going to hear more about that conversation in the coming weeks, as well as groups continue to tackle it and at least start discussions about what needs to be done and what can be done.
So it is really important that we get good price discovery going in the cattle industry. And I think that's where we need to make sure we're focused on is, are we getting good price discovery today? And if the answer to that question is no, then we fundamentally have some work to do in these markets. The answer to that question is yes. We may not always like those prices we get as producers, but if it's good price discovery, it's going to be tougher for us to somehow prop these prices higher, I guess.
All right, you mentioned slaughter numbers. Let's take a look at those. We have been looking at those every week, and especially watching what's going on in year-over-year comparisons as we look back through the height of the shutdowns and slowdowns of COVID-19.
Yeah, so if we look at cattle slaughter for the week ending May 15th, USDA is estimating a run of 640,000 head of cattle. It's actually 2,000 head above where we were a week ago, but it's 121,000 ahead of where we were a year ago. We're starting to come out of that V, if you will, that we saw in 2020. We'll continue to see that year ago shrink as we move forward. But again, as I said, we've slaughtered 12.2 million head of cattle thus far in 2020, and that's nearly 6% above where we were a year ago. I want to be careful with overstating that again, as we're talking about some pretty low slaughter levels in some of these weeks of 20. On the hog side, a run of 2.395 million head of hogs this week. That's 13,000 head lower than where we were a week ago, but 261,000 head above year ago levels. And just like for cattle, we're 1.8% above year ago levels year to date on hog slaughter.
And my assumption is we don't anticipate that continuing through the remainder of the year.
That's correct. I think we're going to continue now to start to see those year to date percentages decline. Where we get to on hogs, I won't be surprised for us to come back to something that's more even to year to date as we continue to roll through some of these weeks in 2021.
Big report this week, supply and demand numbers from the USDA. As we take a look at those, we got our first price projections for 2022. Walk us through what those numbers are and some of the things we're watching as we outline and look ahead to the rest of this year.
Yeah, so if we start on the cattle side here as well, so USDA gives us our first look at 2022 projections for fed cattle prices. They're projecting $122 a hundred for that annual average in 2022. That's up roughly $6 from where they are projecting 2021 at, and would be the highest price we've seen since 2015, if in fact that happens in 2022. So higher prices on the cattle side. Hogs is a different story. So USDA projecting what's a roughly $11 decline in barrel and gilt prices to $56 in 2022. That's in comparison to 67 and some change they're projecting here for 2021. Overall production of beef, pork, and chicken aren't all that different than what they're projecting for 2021. I think that might have a little bit to do with just some higher feed costs that we're seeing the livestock industry have to grapple with. So USDA also gave us our first look at the 2022 corn and soybean meal prices. They project a corn price. So this is the year that starts with harvest this fall of $5.70 a bushel. That's up $1.35 from where we sit in the current 2021 crop year. Soybean meal continues to run high in 2022, according to USDA, at $400 a ton, roughly the same level that we would have seen here in 2021. So a little perspective here. Back in 2020, the corn price was $356, and the soybean meal price was $299 a ton. So much higher feed costs than we've seen for a while. It puts us back at levels that probably haven't seen since about 2014.
I think it's interesting too, we talk about higher prices at the grocery store or higher beef prices or pork prices, but that doesn't necessarily mean higher prices for cattle or hogs back to the producers. And even if it does, that margin and that return on investment looks to be dwindling as we move through this year and look ahead to next.
That squeeze is certainly not looking to be moving in a positive direction. Now I'll say, got a long ways between now and when we put a crop in the bin this fall. I'll say a 15 billion bushel corn crop in the bin and a fairly large soybean production run as well could give us some lower prices. but the 570 projected by USDA is certainly well below where prices sit today. So it is a little worrisome about where we go. Pork in particular, if you think about that $11 decline in prices, yet higher feed costs could certainly create a situation in the pork industry that puts a lot more stress than where we currently sit today.
Let's talk retail prices as we take a look at those, some pretty big numbers as we look at beef and pork.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen the news about higher consumer prices, and meat is just a part of what's going on in terms of higher consumer prices. For the April choice beef retail price, it came in at $6.76 a pound. That's 4.8% higher than where we were a year ago at this time. And that's actually the fourth highest ever in terms of a choice retail beef price. On the pork side, the pork retail price, $4.32 for April of this year. That's up 11% relative to a year ago and is an all-time high for that pork retail price. If we look at the cuts a little bit, your favorite bacon, Megan, is $6.22 in April. That's up a little more than 16% relative to a year ago, and it's the third highest of all time. While ground beef, high at $4.10 a pound, is only up 1.1% relative to where we said a year ago.
I'm going to tell you a little story. So last night, our big kid turns 20 tomorrow, and we went to pick up a brisket and from a very large store. And when we were pricing the brisket, the prime brisket was half the price of the choice brisket. And my husband was like, well, I know what we're putting in our cart.
So you got the choice brisket, right?
No, but it has been that way every time we have gone to the grocery store in recent weeks when we're looking at cuts like that specifically.
So I think we will see some of that change as we move through time. I think this is a brisket in particular is one where some of the barbecue business, as it had gone away, created an opportunity for, again, prime brisket to maybe run below choice. And as we see recovery in demand for food service, and I think barbecue restaurants are a part of that discussion, perhaps we switch that back around again. But I hope a lot of consumers get an opportunity to know the difference between prime and choice brisket, and might be willing to pay even more down the road for the opportunity to eat some higher quality beef.
So that means I need to tell my husband we should stock up on all of the prime brisket we can manage right now.
Time to buy another freezer, I believe, Megan.
I have 3, Scott. I don't know if I need any more. All right. As we wrap up today, the last report we're going to talk about is consumer sentiment. As we take a look at those numbers, are we a little concerned to see a decline?
Yeah, so I think inflation's gotten the headlines of late, and it certainly affected the preliminary May consumer sentiment numbers that we see out. A lot of concern about what happens on the inflation front going forward, and we certainly have a lot of stories related to all kinds of products that are seeing increases. But the main numbers, month over month, we were down 6.2% in that index of consumer sentiment. So not great news in terms of what we saw there after what was some recovery the last couple of months. But still year over year. So if we just think back about where we were a year ago at this time, we're 14.5% higher in the May number relative to where we were a year ago.
Scott, anything else for us this week?
I think we've covered the main things this week, Megan.
As we look ahead to next week, what reports will we be watching?
Yes, we're going to get livestock slaughter out on Thursday, and then we finish the week with cattle on feed, which hopefully gives us some more information about what the second half of 2021 looks like for cattle producers.
Well, I look forward to having that conversation with you then.
Sounds great, Megan.
To have our weekly livestock market update delivered to your email box every Saturday morning, visit our website, brownfieldagnews.com. You can submit questions. You can also subscribe. And for all the great Brownfield podcasts while you're in the cab of the tractor this spring, go to brownfieldagnews.com/podcast. Have a great weekend. I'm Megan Grebner for Brownfield.